All right, Dan. Road trip, baby. Let's turn some tunes on.
Welcome back to the Bendis Fancast. Today we're talking about his fantastic X-Men run.
What the hell is this? This isn't Springsteen. This is a podcast. The hell's a podcast?
It beats Chris Claremont's hands down.
Dude, this is the second time we've done this, don't you
Not
remember?
only that, but Whedon's also.
I'm not gonna be listening again.
Alright, so I know that we had done a podcast episode before. Actually, before my time. I remember suggesting that to you as a fan.
I don't recall
Look
any
at me
of that.
now. I've made it.
You too can be like Mads.
So I figure, that changes a lot, so we could talk about what podcast we are listening to right now. So I'll start off.
Okay.
So I thought I'd start with something really geeky, but actually the podcast I listen to the most to is Armchair Expert.
Armchair Expert?
Yeah, so it's led by Dax Shepard, who was in
That sounds actually pretty geeky, though.
I know, it does, right? It's more of a celebrity interview podcast thing, but it's led by Dax Shepard. Most people know him as being married to Kristen Bell.
Ah, yes, okay.
Yeah, he was in Without a Paddle, Parenthood, wow. He's on Punk'd. That's where he got popular.
Yeah,
Most people know him from that,
Punk'd.
yeah. I'm a big fan of his. And I love him probably because of Kristen Bell, because I identify with her. Fellow emotional sloth lover. But, so basically every week he has two different shows. On Mondays he has a celebrity come on and speak with him. Sometimes a musician, sometimes just an actor or actress or something. And he asks them really cool personal questions, and it's really nice. And on Thursdays he has an expert come in. I usually don't watch those, because I'm just there for just the mindless entertainment, not to learn anything.
And this is podcast only?
It's a podcast, yeah. So iTunes, Spotify.
Okay.
But it's really nice. It's not your typical TMZ, get to know the stars. What are they doing? Who are they sleeping with? It's just oh, so yeah, you did this when you were a kid, right? Oh, what's that about? How did it make you feel?
Is it like The Late Show, or?
Yeah, it kind of feels like watching a more relaxed nighttime show. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have you don't have the rehearsed answers. There's just two people chilling on couches in his upstairs, above the garage,
loft.
Yeah, so...
Well, I mean, that's where all podcasts take place, though.
As they should.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're in the basement.
where Omar keeps us hidden.
Please
But
help.
yeah, and then Tina, I know that you've been listening to something that I've been a big, long-time fan of.
Right, so and this one is really, really, really geeky. So it's the Adventure Zone, or TAZ.
Yes.
Yeah, with the McElroy brothers and their dad, which is an interesting dynamic when you're playing D&D.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I can't imagine playing D&D with my father.
Yeah.
That'd be too...
So the Adventure Zone, right, is a D&D podcast.
Right.
Now they're playing 5th
D&D-ish,
edition.
right?
No, it's D&D.
Well, I will say D&D-ish because they're not...
The rules are light.
Yeah.
Yeah, their dad tends to not really pay attention to his spell book. Also, even though he's a cleric, he never really heals.
No, but he does do the Zone of Truth.
The Zone of Truth.
Ah.
So he is definitely a Zone of Truther.
But it's super funny, and then Griffin's a DM.
Right.
And he, they started out as a joke, and then it just kept going.
Yeah.
And then somehow Griffin put together a very extensive,
World.
pretty detailed story arc and world, yeah.
It is very, I'm midway through the second. So I actually entered fairly late, but I'm always this is gold, this is great, I love it. And if you're interested in D&D or
just
even
fantasy.
light, and what I would say, it's not highbrow, it's definitely sort of a mid-grade to low, because it's very attainable for just an average person. If you want something a little bit more highbrow, I would go with Critical Role, because that's definitely deep fantasy or a little bit more complex.
Yeah. And Critical Role is done by a bunch of voice actors, so they're very, very talented, great at role-playing. Now, each episode is about 4 hours, so there's that.
Yeah.
That's the thing,
but... they're very dedicated, it's very
and that's Critical Role. The Adventure Zone, about an hour.
No, they're a bunch of just yahoos.
Yeah, they're yahoos. So... you're why haven't any of these characters died? And even Griffin, and he's I've been a little bit liberal. You guys probably should have died a couple times over, but the characters are so ingrained and great. It's just like, you guys are good.
Nice.
I think I've seen an advertisement for this on like YouTube or something.
Oh yeah, there's
yeah.
comic books
There's
out now
comics,
too.
Yeah, and I've listened to it here and there, and I've never spent the time to like go back and start from the beginning.
Yeah,
But-
do their abbreviated because they dropped the original pilot and then they cleaned it up. I would say start with the cleaned up version because
Okay.
it's a little bit more accessible. You don't have to sit through them talking over their
That's
characters.
the fun part.
Yeah, that's true. Figuring out their characters and messing up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll start with one to try to keep in with the gaming aspect a little bit. But it's a podcast from Relay FM called Playing for Fun.
Okay.
And it's a video game podcast.
Hey.
Which, you know, Dan listens to video game podcasts.
I'm very surprised. Okay.
But no, the reason I love it, it's Mike Hurley and Tiff Harmon, and they talk about video games, but just the stuff they like about the games.
Oh, that's
So
really
it's
sweet.
like
That's
a
nice.
this is all, you know, it's just like they pick a game and then they talk about it for an hour or so, but it's all positive. It's like
good.
these are all the things that are great about this game.
I hear so
and it's
many
just-
people just railing on games.
Yeah,
these
exactly.
days.
And it's a nice change. I mean, for that, you know, listening to their Zelda episode was what finally pushed me over the edge to get and play Zelda. So, and I don't, you know, it's one of these where it's kind of like I have some interest in this game, so I'm curious. I'll listen to that. I don't listen to every episode, but I really enjoy just their dynamic, and they're both people who are really good at saying this is what's great about all this without the but.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a nice, positive, fun podcast that I enjoy
like
a lot.
that.
Whereas, listening to Rob for more than 5 minutes.
Right? All his jargon.
I guilty. I'm very jargony, which is why I'm
He's going to talk about his favorite JRPG podcast.
Oh my god, have we talked about this before? So, podcast I listen to religiously every other week that comes out is called 8-4 Play. It is about Japanese culture and Japanese video games.
Okay.
It's no, you can't talk about podcasts you've been on.
And sometimes
That's
I have
cheating.
been a guest on this podcast.
That is kind of cheating, though.
What's cheating?
I like About Heroes. It's your best
Let me
podcast.
just-
you
About Heroes was dope!
Wait, I got this. I'm Rob, and here's my plug.
So no, these are I have no financial or anything like investment in these guys, but their podcast is fantastic. They talk about not just necessarily Japanese games, but because they are Americans living in Japan,
Okay.
and they do translations for various projects, both to and from Japanese. They have an interesting point of view because they're in Japan, they're in the thick of it, but they also still get American games and talk about things like that. So yes, these are some of my buddies from way back in the day, but they still talk about things that are very interesting, like when the emperor changed, they talked about stuff like that. They talk about the season, they talk about food, they talk about just Japanese culture and just living in Japan, and additionally talking about Japanese games. So they're really cool. I recommend them 8-4 Play. And yes, they are, because they're in the industry, they do kind of get a little technical about things, but it's still, I don't think it's inapproachable. Like if there's some random obscure game that you need to check out, they'll mention, hey, there's this random game about this Russian guy who punches people in the face. It's an RPG thing. You'd love it. I don't remember the name of it, but they were talking about it. It's awesome. So yeah, 8-4 Play is
That
one of
sounds
those.
really neat.
Yeah,
Because
it's good.
that intersects a lot of my interests.
Yes.
Coming from a background where I studied Japanese culture academically, and then playing a lot of Japanese video games.
Yeah.
To me, that seems really, really neat. Like you could really do some good deep dives on Japanese society and how they are in video games.
You
Like,
two would love
That's
this.
fun.
Love
Yeah.
this. So check it out.
All right, well, I'll jump in with another one. Last time, I'm sure I talked about CGP Grade podcasts, Hello Internet, and Cortex. That's not what I'm going to talk about now.
Nice Rob
No,
there.
I don't know if I talked about Cortex or not, but that's one of my favorites. But that what I was going to talk about until you mentioned academic interests in things. So I'm going to talk about Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast instead. Mike Duncan is the guy who did the 200 and some odd episode History of Rome series, in which in episode 25 he compares Hannibal's elephants to AT-ATs. But the Revolutions podcast, which has actually been going for a lot longer now, he started, I think, with the English Revolution and has just been historical revolutions in context and going through like, and as he's doing more, they're kind of, you know, connecting up with trends and wider things. And he's just started the Russian Revolution, you know, from the early 20th century.
Yeah.
And it's just phenomenal. It's been a long time getting here, but it was American, British, French, obviously, Haitian Revolution, Mexican Revolution, and I think that's it. There may have been another that I missed.
Oh man, I love.
But
That's awesome.
It sounds great.
yeah, it is great.
I love history podcasts, but it's so hard to find good ones.
Oh, yeah.
Just,
No,
like,
Right, because a lot of them are droning, because
Yeah.
I had a couple on my list, and they were just droning on and on and on. I was like, okay, I can't do
I've
this.
tried a lot of other history podcasts, and it's just like, you know, and every now and then it's like, okay, this is kind of dry, but he does a really good job of not punching it up, but just like he more so than any other history podcast, other than like, you know, Dan Carlin, which is kind of a history podcast, but also like, oh my god, you know, he does a great job of abridging things in a way that makes them interesting, and in where you don't feel like I'm missing something important, you know. So full recommendation for the Revolutions podcast.
Really interesting. These are some of our favorite podcasts. What are yours?
Please like, subscribe, and follow us on our social media at NearMintCon.
We also have a Patreon. Thank you.
All right, Dan, road trip, payback. Dan, really? All right, Dan, road trip. Me too. I was supposed to scream. And road trip, baby. Yes. All right, let's turn on some tunes.
Welcome to another episode of Dank Memes.
What are we talking about?
What the hell is this?
Sorry, I don't know.